Hello, everyone, and welcome to Best English Podcast. My name is Sophia, and I am so happy that you have chosen to spend some of your valuable time with me today. This is a place for you to relax, listen, and let the English language wash over you, helping you learn and improve in a calm and natural way. Today, we are going to do something a little different. We are not going to talk about grammar rules or vocabulary lists in the usual way. Instead, we are going to embark on a journey. We are going to travel back in time to a period in American history that was full of hardship, but also full of incredible courage. I am going to tell you a story, a long and detailed story about a family, about a dream, and about the long, dusty road they had to travel to find a new beginning. Have you ever had a dream that seemed so far away, so impossible, that it took every piece of strength you had just to keep moving towards it? Have you ever had to leave everything you know and love behind to step into a future that was completely uncertain? This is a story about that feeling. It's a story about what happens when the world you know disappears, and you have to find the will to build a new one. As you listen, I want you to do more than just hear the words. I want you to see the images in your mind. I want you to feel the sun on your skin, the dust in your throat, and the hope in your heart. Through this story, we will explore new words. We will understand deep human emotions, and we will see how the English language can be used to paint a picture of life itself. This is not just a history lesson, it is a human lesson. So, find a comfortable place, take a slow, deep breath, and let's travel back together to the American heartland in the 2020s, and meet a young boy named Leo, whose world was about to change forever. Before the dust came, life was simple, it was predictable. For Leo, who was just 10 years old, the world was the size of his family's farm in Oklahoma. It was a world measured in acres of wheat and corn, a world where the biggest events were the changing of the seasons. He remembered the mornings most clearly. He would wake up not to the sound of an alarm clock, but to the soft, golden light that would creep through the window of the small room he shared with his little sister, Clara. The air would be cool and clean, and it would smell of damp earth and growing things. It was a smell of life, of promise. His father, a tall, quiet man named Thomas, would already be outside. Leo would watch him from the window, his father's figure dark against the bright orange and pink of the sunrise. Thomas moved with a slow, steady rhythm that seemed to be a part of the land itself. He knew the farm like he knew the lines on his own hands. He knew which fields needed water, which ones needed rest. He could look at a single stalk of wheat and tell you if it would grow up strong. Leo's mother, Sarah, would be in the kitchen. The warm, comforting smell of baking bread and brewing coffee would fill their small wooden house. The house was not big, and it was not fancy, but it was filled with a quiet kind of love, the kind of love that you feel more than you hear. Leo's days were a collection of small, important jobs. He would feed the chickens, their feathers soft and warm as they clucked around his feet. He would help his father in the fields, carrying buckets of water that felt heavy in his small hands. His father didn't talk much, but he would teach Leo things. He would say, "Look, son, you see how the soil is dark and rich? That's what we want. It means the land is healthy. It'll take care of us, as long as we take care of it." Leo believed him. The land was like another member of their family. It was their partner. It gave them everything they needed. In the afternoons, when the sun was high and hot in the sky. Leo and Clara would play in the shade of the big oak tree that stood near the house. They would imagine they were explorers in a deep jungle, or that the tree was a tall castle they had to defend. Life was not easy, of course. They didn't have much money. Their clothes were often patched and worn, but they had enough. They had food on the table, a roof over their heads, and they had each other. They had a future that seemed as straight and clear as the rows of corn in their fields. They would grow up. Leo would take over the farm from his father, and the cycle of life would continue. It was the only world they had ever known, and they couldn't imagine it any other way. They didn't know that the sky was about to change. They didn't know that the same land that had given them everything was about to try and take it all away. They didn't know that the wind, which used to be a gentle friend that cooled them on hot days, was about to become their greatest enemy. The time of simplicity was coming to an end. The dust was coming. It started slowly, so slowly, in fact, that at first nobody really paid much attention. The summers had always been hot in Oklahoma, and the rain had always been precious. But this year, the heat felt different. It was a heavy, suffocating heat that seemed to press down on the land, day after day, week after week. The sky, which was usually a brilliant, endless blue, began to look pale and washed out, as if all the color had been baked away. The rain simply stopped. Leo watched his father's face change. The usual quiet confidence in his eyes was replaced by a small, tight line of worry around his mouth. Thomas would stand at the edge of the fields in the evening, looking up at the cloudless sky, his shoulders a little less straight than before. The rich, dark soil that he had been so proud of began to turn a light, dusty brown. When Leo walked on it, it didn't feel soft anymore. It felt hard and brittle, like walking on broken glass. The corn stalks, which should have been tall and green, were short and yellow. Their leaves were curled and dry. They looked like they were begging for water. Let's pause for a moment and look at a word I just used, brittle. B-R-I-T-T-L-E. Brittle. Something that is brittle is hard, but it breaks very easily. Think of a dry leaf in the autumn. You can pick it up, and it feels solid, but if you squeeze it in your hand, it shatters into tiny pieces. That leaf is brittle. The soil on Leo's farm had become brittle. It was hard, but it was weak. This is a wonderful descriptive word. Can you think of something else that is brittle? Maybe a very thin piece of old plastic, or a type of cookie that snaps when you break it. The opposite of brittle might be something like flexible or strong. Leo's world, which had once seemed so strong, was becoming brittle, ready to break apart. And then, the wind began to blow. It was not the normal wind. This wind had a different sound. It was a low, mournful sound, like an animal crying in the distance. And it never stopped. It blew all day and all night, a constant, restless presence. It picked up the dry, brittle topsoil from the fields and began to move it. At first, it was just small clouds of dust that would dance across the ground. But soon, the dust clouds grew bigger. They became a haze that hung in the air, making the sun look like a pale, sick orange. Leo's mother, Sarah, started hanging wet sheets over the windows and doorways, trying to keep the dust out of the house, but it was impossible. A fine layer of brown powder covered everything: the table, the chairs, their beds, their food. When Leo woke up in the morning, his throat was dry and sore, and he could taste the grit of the earth in his mouth. The grown-ups started talking in low, worried voices. They used a new word, a word Leo had never heard before, drought, D-R-O-U-G-H-T, drought. A drought is a long period of time when there is very little or no rain. It's a simple word, but it holds so much fear for a farmer. A farm cannot survive without rain. It's the lifeblood of the land. His father would sit at the kitchen table with other farmers from nearby. Their faces were covered in dust, and their eyes were red and tired. Leo would listen to them talk. "The wheat is all gone," one man said, his voice rough. "Just blew away." Another said, "My well is almost dry. I don't know what we'll give the animals to drink." They were strong men who worked with their hands every day. But Leo could hear the fear in their voices. It was a fear that was as thick as the dust in the air. The first big storm came on a Sunday afternoon. Leo and his family had just returned from church. The sky had been a strange, yellowish gray all morning. There was no wind, and the air was heavy and still. It was an unnatural silence. Even the birds were quiet. Then, on the western horizon, Leo saw it. It looked like a dark wall, a solid wall of black and brown that was moving towards them. It was so tall that it seemed to touch the sky. It wasn't a rain cloud, it was something else. Something terrifying. His father saw it too. "Inside! Now!" he yelled, his voice sharp with an urgency Leo had never heard before. They scrambled into the house, and Thomas slammed the door shut, stuffing rags into the cracks at the bottom. Sarah grabbed Clara and held her close. Within minutes, the world outside disappeared. The day turned into night. The sun was completely gone, blocked out by the enormous cloud. And then the sound started. It was a deep, roaring sound, like a freight train was passing right next to their house. The wind hit the small wooden structure with a physical force, and the whole house shook. Dust began to pour in through every tiny crack, around the windows, through the floorboards. It was like a brown fog, and it quickly became hard to see, even inside the house. Leo coughed, his lungs filling with the dry, choking dust. He could hear Clara crying, her small sobs muffled by their mother's dress. The storm raged for hours. Leo sat on the floor, huddled with his family. He couldn't see his father's face in the darkness, but he could feel his strong arm around him. It was the only solid thing in a world that seemed to be falling apart. When the storm finally passed and a weak, hazy light returned, Thomas opened the door. The world Leo had known his entire life was gone. Their farm was buried. The fields of yellow corn were gone, hidden under a deep layer of fine brown dust that looked like a soft, dead blanket. The fence posts were almost completely covered. The small garden where his mother grew vegetables had disappeared. The air smelled of dirt and death. Leo looked at his father. Thomas stood there, looking at the devastation, and for the first time, Leo saw his father, the strongest man he knew, look utterly defeated. The land had not just died, it had been turned into a weapon against them. This was not just a storm. This was the beginning of the Dust Bowl. The days that followed the great dust storm blended into a long, miserable blur. There was no recovery. There was nothing to recover. The farm was gone. The topsoil, the rich, life-giving part of the earth, had been blown away. Some of it traveling hundreds of miles to the east. What was left was a hard, barren wasteland. There was nothing to plant. And even if there were, there was no rain to make it grow. The word barren is a good one to know here. B-A-R-R-E-N, barren. It means a place is too poor to produce any plants. A desert is a barren landscape. The fields of Oklahoma had become barren. They were empty, lifeless, and unable to provide anything. The family's small savings of money quickly began to run out. Sarah did her best to make their food last. Meals became smaller and simpler. A small piece of bread, some thin soup. Meat became a rare luxury. Leo was always a little bit hungry. He saw the worry in his mother's eyes as she looked into their nearly empty pantry. But it wasn't just the hunger that was hard. It was the idleness. For the first time in his life, Leo's father had no work to do. He would wake up in the morning, a habit from a lifetime of farming. But there were no fields to plow, no crops to tend to. He would just stand on the porch, staring out at the brown, desolate landscape. Let's look at that word, desolate, D-E-S-O-L-A-T-E, desolate. It's an adjective that describes a place that is empty and makes you feel very sad and lonely. A battlefield after a war could be described as desolate. An abandoned town is desolate. The farm had become desolate. It was more than just empty. It was a sad emptiness. It was full of the ghosts of what used to be. Pause for a moment. Can you think of a scene in a movie or a picture you have seen that you would describe as desolate? Try to picture it in your mind. Using powerful words like barren and desolate helps to create a strong feeling and image for the listener. The atmosphere in the small house grew heavy with unspoken fears. The quiet, comfortable love was replaced by a tense, worried silence. One evening, the banker from town came to visit. He was a man in a clean suit, and he looked very out of place in their dusty home. He spoke to Leo's father in a low voice, but Leo could hear some of the words from the other room. Words like loan, payments, and foreclosure. Leo didn't understand what all the words meant, but he understood the feeling behind them. After the banker left, his father sat at the kitchen table for a very long time, his head in his hands. That night, Leo heard his mother crying softly in her bedroom. The decision was not made in one moment. It was a slow, painful realization that grew over many weeks. The dust storms kept coming. The sky was now almost permanently brown. People started getting sick from breathing in the dust all the time. They called it dust pneumonia. Little Clara had a cough that would not go away. They knew they could not stay. To stay meant to give up completely. One afternoon, a truck rattled down their road. It was their neighbor, Mr. Henderson. His truck was piled high with all of his family's belongings, mattresses, chairs, pots and pans, all tied down with rope. Mr. Henderson stopped his truck. His face was thin and tired. "We're heading west," he said to Leo's father. "To California. I hear there's work there, picking fruit. They need people." He handed Thomas a small piece of paper, a handbill. It was brightly colored, and it had a picture of a beautiful green valley filled with orange trees. Big letters at the top said, "Work in sunny California. Good wages. A new start for your family." Leo looked at the picture. It seemed like a fantasy, a world from a storybook, green trees, blue skies. It was hard to even remember what that looked like. His father took the handbill and just stared at it. After Mr. Henderson drove away, leaving a cloud of dust behind him, Thomas walked into the house and put the handbill on the kitchen table. He and Sarah looked at it, and then they looked at each other. There were no more words to say. The farm was gone. Their savings were gone. Their hope for the future in this place was gone. All they had left was a small chance, a tiny glimmer of possibility, represented by that colorful piece of paper. That evening, Thomas made the announcement. He gathered Leo and Clara in the small living room. His voice was steady, but Leo could see the pain in his eyes. "We are going to leave," he said simply. "We are going to California. We'll find work there. We'll find a new home." Clara, who was only 6, started to cry. "But I don't want a new home," she sobbed. "I like our home." Leo felt a knot of fear tighten in his stomach. Leave? Leave the farm? Leave the only place he had ever known? The idea was terrifying. But then he looked at his father's face. He saw desperation. But he also saw a flicker of something else. Determination. Let's look at that word, determination. 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 It is a noun. It is the quality of continuing to try to do something, even when it is very difficult. If you are learning English, you need determination. You have to keep studying even on the days you feel tired or frustrated. Thomas's face showed determination. He had made a decision, and he was not going to give up. Sarah put her hand on her husband's arm. "He's right," she said, her voice soft but firm. "There is nothing left for us here. We have to go." And so, it was decided. They were going to California. They were going to join the thousands of other families who were leaving their ruined farms behind, all heading west on a highway called Route 66, all chasing the same fragile dream printed on a colorful handbill. They were about to become migrants, travelers in their own country, searching for a place to start again. The next few days were a strange and sad whirlwind of activity. The family had to decide what to take and what to leave behind. And when you have to fit your entire life into a small old truck, you discover how few things are truly essential. The truck itself was a character in this story. It was an old Ford, a model that people often called a jalopy, Jalopy, jalopy. This is a fun, informal word for an old car that is in poor condition. It's not a word you would use for a new car, only for one that is old, rusty, and maybe a little unreliable. Their jalopy was certainly unreliable, but it was their only hope. Thomas, Leo's father, spent a whole day working on the truck's engine. He was not a mechanic, but like most farmers, he knew a little bit about fixing things. He changed the oil. He checked the tires, which were thin and worn. He hoped, he prayed, that the old truck would be strong enough to make the long journey. The journey was over 1,000 miles. 1,000 miles through deserts and over mountains. It was a long way for a healthy new car. For their old jalopy, it seemed almost impossible. Meanwhile, Sarah, Leo's mother, was sorting through their belongings inside the house. It was a heartbreaking task. Every object held a memory. The big wooden dining table where they had shared every meal. It was too big. They had to leave it. The rocking chair where she had sung lullabies to both her children. It would not fit. They had to leave it. Clara's collection of dolls, the books Leo loved to read. There was no room. Leo watched his mother as she touched each item. Her face a mask of sorrow. She was not just packing things, she was saying goodbye to their past, piece by piece. They could take only the most practical items, a mattress, some blankets, a few pots and pans, a box of tools, and enough clothes to wear. Sarah carefully packed away the family photographs in a small wooden box. "We have to take these," she said, her voice quiet, "so we can remember who we are." She also packed a small bag of seeds from her vegetable garden. It seemed like a strange thing to take, since they had no land to plant them in. But for her, those seeds represented hope. The hope that one day, somewhere, she would have a small patch of earth to call her own again. Leo was given a small crate to pack his own things. He looked at his few treasures: a wooden toy car his father had made for him, a slingshot he had used to hunt for rabbits, a book of adventure stories. He knew he couldn't take them all. He sat on his bed for a long time, trying to choose. In the end, he packed only the book. He thought that maybe, on the long road, he could read the stories and imagine he was somewhere else, on a great adventure, instead of on a desperate journey. The process of packing was a lesson in letting go. They were shedding their old lives, becoming lighter and smaller, ready for the road. The family was in a state of desperation. This is a key word for their situation: desperation. desperation. It is a noun. It is the feeling of being in a situation so bad that you are willing to do anything to change it. When you feel desperation, you have no hope for your current situation, so you will take a big risk for a small chance of something better. The family felt desperation. Staying in Oklahoma was hopeless. So they were willing to risk the dangerous journey to California. On their last day, they sold everything they could not take: the dining table, the chairs, the farm equipment, the chickens. Another farmer who was staying behind came and bought it all. He didn't have much money, so he didn't pay them very much. But any amount of money was precious now. They would need every single penny for gas and food on the road. The house felt strangely empty and quiet after everything was gone. It didn't feel like their home anymore. It was just a wooden box full of echoes and memories. The morning they left, the sky was the same dusty brown it had been for months. There was no grand goodbye. They climbed into the old truck, Thomas at the wheel, Sarah beside him holding a sleeping Clara, and Leo in the back, sitting on the mattress, surrounded by their few possessions. Thomas started the engine. It made a loud, coughing sound, but it started. He didn't look back at the house. He just put the truck in gear and started driving down the dirt road that led away from the farm. Leo, however, did look back. He watched the small wooden house, the big oak tree, and the barren fields get smaller and smaller until they were just a speck in the distance. And then they disappeared into the brown haze. A single tear rolled down his cheek, leaving a clean trail in the dust on his skin. He was leaving the only world he had ever known. He was scared, but he was also sitting next to the box with his father's tools and holding his book of adventure stories. He didn't know what was ahead of them. Nobody did. But they were moving. They had hit the road. This expression, "to hit the road," is a very common idiom in American English. It simply means to begin a journey. You might say to your friend, "It's getting late." I think it's time to hit the road. Leo's family was now hitting the road, heading west on Route 66, a road that was already becoming famous as the main path for thousands of families just like them, all searching for a new life in the land of sunshine and oranges. The first few days on the road were a blur of new sights and sounds, all seen through a constant filter of dust. Route 66 was not a modern highway like we know today. In many places, it was just a narrow, bumpy road, and it was crowded. It was a river of desperation flowing west. They were surrounded by other vehicles that looked just as tired and overloaded as their own. Old trucks, patched-up cars, some even pulling small handmade trailers. All of them were piled high with mattresses, furniture, and families with worried faces. Leo would look at the children in the other cars. Their faces were smudged with dirt, and their eyes were big and serious. He saw his own fear and uncertainty reflected back at him. The journey created a strange and temporary community. Let's look at that word, community. C-O-M-M-U-N-I-T-Y, community. It means a group of people who live in the same place or have a particular characteristic in common. Your neighborhood is a community. Your school is a community. The people on the road, all moving from the same place to the same place, for the same reasons, formed a temporary community. They were all in the same boat. This is another great idiom. To be in the same boat means to be in the same difficult situation as other people. All the families on Route 66 were in the same boat. At night, they would pull over to the side of the road and make camp. They didn't have tents. They would simply sleep in the truck or on the mattress on the ground. Thomas would build a small fire, and Sarah would cook a simple meal, usually just some beans or potatoes. Other families would be camped nearby. Sometimes, the men would gather together and talk in low voices. They would share information. "I heard there's no water for the next 100 miles, one might say. Or, "Someone told me the police are turning people back at the Arizona border." They shared rumors and fears. But they also shared advice and help. If one car broke down, others would stop. The men would work together, sharing tools and knowledge to get the car running again. Leo found this fascinating. He watched as his father, a man who rarely spoke to strangers, became part of this roadside brotherhood. He saw the quiet understanding that passed between these men who had lost everything. They were connected by their shared hardship. There is a powerful word for this kind of connection, solidarity. S-O-L-I-D-A-R-I-T-Y. Solidarity. It is a feeling of unity based on common interests or objectives. The families on the road felt solidarity with each other. They were all facing the same problems, so they helped each other. One evening, their truck got a flat tire. Thomas pulled over, his face grim. The spare tire they had was old and not in good condition. As he was struggling to change the tire, a car pulled over behind them. A man got out. He was thin, with a kind face. "Looks like you've got some trouble," he said. He introduced himself as John. He was traveling with his wife and 2 young sons. He looked at their bad spare tire and shook his head. "That one won't last you 10 miles, he said. "Here, take mine. It's not new, but it's better than that one." Thomas was shocked. "I can't," he said. "What will you do if you get a flat?" John just smiled a tired smile. "We'll worry about that when it happens. We're all in this together, aren't we?" He helped Thomas change the tire. While they worked, his wife came over and gave Sarah a small bag of apples for the children. It was a simple act of kindness, but to Leo's family, it felt like a miracle. It was a reminder that even in the midst of all this hardship, there was still goodness in people. However, not everyone they met was kind. As they traveled further west, away from the Dust Bowl region, the way people looked at them began to change. In Texas and New Mexico, They started to see signs in store windows that said, "No Okies." Okie was a nickname for someone from Oklahoma. At first, it was just a name, but now it was being used as an insult. It meant you were poor, you were dirty, you were unwanted. Leo experienced this firsthand one afternoon when they stopped for gas. They had just enough money for a few gallons. Sarah gave Leo a nickel to go into the small store and buy a piece of candy for him and Clara. Leo was excited. It had been weeks since he had tasted anything sweet. He walked into the store. The man behind the counter was large, with a sour look on his face. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice unfriendly. Leo held out his nickel. "A piece of candy, please." The man looked at Leo's dusty clothes and dirty face. He sneered. A sneer is a very ugly kind of smile. It's a smile that shows you have no respect for someone. The man sneered and said, "We don't serve your kind here. Get out." Leo was confused. "My kind? You're an Okie," the man snapped. "Now get out of my store before I call the sheriff." Leo felt his face turn red with shame and anger. He ran out of the store, tears welling up in his eyes. He didn't understand. Why did this man hate him? He had never done anything to him. He was just a boy who wanted a piece of candy. When he told his parents what had happened, he saw a look of deep pain on his father's face and a flash of anger in his eyes. Thomas clenched his fists, but he said nothing. He just paid for the gas. And they drove away in silence. This was a new kind of hardship. It was not like the dust or the hunger. This was a pain that came from other people. They were being treated like they were less than human, simply because of where they came from and because they were poor. They were experiencing prejudice. 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 This is a very important word. It means an unfair and unreasonable opinion or feeling, especially when formed without enough thought or knowledge. The store owner had a prejudice against people from Oklahoma. He didn't know Leo, but he judged him based on a label. This was a hard lesson for Leo to learn. The world was not just difficult, it could also be cruel. The journey was taking its toll on all of them. They were all thinner. Their faces were burned by the sun and wind. But the journey was hardest on the old jalopy. The truck was groaning under the weight of their lives. The engine would overheat in the hot desert sun, and Thomas would have to pull over and wait for it to cool down. The roads over the mountains were steep and dangerous. The truck's brakes were weak, and going downhill was terrifying. Every strange new sound from the engine made them hold their breath, terrified that this would be the moment the truck would die for good. One day, in the middle of the Arizona desert, their worst fear came true. There was a loud bang from the engine, followed by a terrible grinding noise, and then silence. The truck rolled to a stop at the side of the road. Thomas tried to start it again, but the engine was dead. They were stranded. They were in the middle of nowhere. The sun was beating down, and there was no shade. Cars and trucks passed by, but no one stopped. They were just another broken-down family on the side of the road. Despair began to set in. Despair is a powerful feeling. Despair. It is the feeling of having no hope at all. As they sat there, watching the cars go by, they began to feel despair. Was this the end of their journey? Would they be stuck here forever? Sarah held the children close, trying to shield them from the sun. Thomas opened the hood of the truck and stared at the silent, greasy engine. He was not a mechanic. He had no idea what was wrong. He kicked the tire in frustration, and for the first time on the journey, Leo saw his father give up. He just sat down on the side of the road, put his face in his hands, and his body shook with silent sobs. Seeing his father, his strong, determined father, break down like this was the most frightening thing Leo had ever witnessed. It felt like the whole world was ending. But then, something shifted. Sarah, who had been quiet and fearful for so much of the journey, stood up. She walked over to her husband and put a hand on his shoulder. "Thomas," she said, her voice surprisingly strong, "crying isn't going to fix this. We are not going to die here." "Now get up." Thomas looked up at her, his eyes full of shock and shame. She looked back at him, and her face was not soft and gentle anymore. It was hard, like steel. "Leo," she said, turning to him, "take the water jug and start walking down the road. If you see a town or a gas station, you tell them we need help. Clara and I will stay here with your father." Leo was terrified. Walk? Alone? In the desert? But he looked at his mother's face, at her new and surprising strength, and he felt a little bit of that strength transfer to him. He nodded. He took the jug, and he started walking. The asphalt was hot through the thin soles of his shoes. The sun was relentless. But he kept going. He was no longer just a boy. He was a part of the family's survival. He had a job to do. This moment was a turning point. It was the moment they realized they could not rely on just one person's strength. They had to find strength in each other. Each of them had a part to play in getting the family through this crisis. The journey was not just changing where they lived, it was changing who they were. After what felt like an eternity of walking under the blazing Arizona sun, Leo saw something shimmering in the distance. At first, he thought it was a mirage, a trick of the heat. But as he got closer, he saw that it was real. It was a small, dusty gas station with a single pump and a small garage attached. It looked old and forgotten. But there was a man outside, wiping his hands on a greasy rag. Leo started to run, his heart pounding with a mixture of hope and fear. He ran up to the man, out of breath, and told him about their broken-down truck. The man, whose name was Al, listened patiently. He had a kind, weathered face. He had seen hundreds of families like Leo's. He sighed, then nodded. "All right, son," he said. "Let's go take a look." He drove Leo back to the stranded jalopy in his own tow truck. When they arrived, Leo's father, Thomas, looked up with shame, embarrassed that his son had been the one to find help. But Al from the garage just gave him a friendly nod. He looked at the engine for a long time. Finally, he said, "Well, the good news is I can fix it. The bad news is it'll take a day or two, and it's going to cost you $20. $20. To Leo, it sounded like $1 million. He knew they didn't have that much money left. He saw the look of despair return to his father's face. Thomas shook his head. "We don't have it," he said quietly. "We've only got 5. Al was silent for a moment. He looked at the tired, dusty family. He looked at Sarah, holding a sleeping Clara. He looked at Leo, whose face was streaked with dirt and sweat, but whose eyes were watching him with intense hope. Then Al sighed again. "Look," he said, "I can't do it for free. I've got a family to feed too, but I'll tell you what, I'll fix your truck, and you can work for me for a couple of days to pay for it. You, son," he said, pointing to Leo, "you can help me clean up the garage. And you," he said to Thomas, You can help me fix that fence out back." Relief washed over the family so powerfully that Leo felt his knees go weak. It was an incredible offer. It was a chance. Thomas agreed immediately, his voice thick with gratitude. Al towed their truck to his garage. He let them sleep in a small, clean room behind the garage. That night, for the first time in weeks, they slept with a solid roof over their heads. Sarah cooked a meal on Al's stove. He even gave them some fresh vegetables from his wife's garden. For the next 2 days, Leo and his father worked harder than they ever had before. Thomas repaired the fence under the hot sun, his farmer's hands finding comfort in the familiar work. Leo swept the greasy floor of the garage, organized tools, and helped Al with small tasks. He watched Al work on their truck's engine, fascinated by the complexity of the machine. Al was patient and kind. He explained what he was doing, naming the different parts of the engine. Leo learned the words carburetor and distributor. It was a different kind of knowledge from the farming knowledge his father had, but Leo found it just as interesting. He realized that survival wasn't just about knowing one thing. It was about being willing and able to learn new things. This situation, which had seemed like a disaster, had become a valuable lesson. This is a perfect example of the idiom, a blessing in disguise. A blessing is a good thing. A disguise is something you wear so people don't know who you are. So, a blessing in disguise is a situation that seems bad at first, but actually turns out to be good. Losing a job might be a blessing in disguise if it leads you to find a much better one. For Leo's family, the truck breaking down was a blessing in disguise because it led them to meet Al, who not only fixed their truck, but also showed them kindness and gave them a safe place to rest. When the truck was finally fixed and the work was done, it was time to leave. Thomas tried to thank Al, but he couldn't find the right words. Al just clapped him on the shoulder. "You just get your family to California safely," he said. "That's all the thanks I need." As they drove away, Leo looked back and waved to Al, who was standing in the doorway of his garage. He would never forget the kindness of that man in the middle of the desert. He was a reminder that the world was not just full of prejudice and cruelty. It was also full of unexpected goodness. The rest of the journey over the mountains was difficult, but the truck kept going, and finally, one afternoon, they came to the top of a hill, and they saw it. Below them, stretching out as far as they could see, was a wide green valley. It was the Central Valley of California. After months of seeing only brown and gray, the vibrant green was shocking. It looked exactly like the picture on the handbill. There were endless fields of vegetables and vast orchards of fruit trees. To their tired, dust-filled eyes, it looked like paradise. It looked like the promised land, a wave of hope, stronger than any they had felt before, filled the small truck. "We made it," Sarah whispered, tears of relief running down her face. "We actually made it." They drove down into the green valley, believing that their struggles were finally over. They did not know that they had only just arrived at the beginning of a whole new set of challenges. Their arrival in California was not the happy ending they had dreamed of. The beautiful green valley that had looked like paradise from the top of the hill looked very different up close. Yes, there was work, but there were also thousands and thousands of other families, just like them, who had also followed the promise of the handbills. There were far more workers than there were jobs. This created a situation that was perfect for the large farm owners. They could pay the workers almost nothing because they knew if one family complained, there were 100 more waiting to take their place. Leo's family learned this on their very first day. They found a large farm that was hiring people to pick cotton. The boss, a big man with a hard face, told them the pay. It was so low, it was barely enough to buy food for one day. But they were desperate, so they took the job. The whole family had to work. Thomas, Sarah, and even 10-year-old Leo. Little Clara was too young, so she would sit at the edge of the field and watch. The work was brutal. From early in the morning until late in the evening, they moved through the cotton fields under the scorching California sun. The cotton plants were prickly, and they scratched their hands. Their backs ached from bending over all day. At the end of the day, their bags of cotton were weighed, and they were given their few cents in pay. It was exhausting, soul-crushing work. Let's look at that phrase. Soul-crushing. This is a very strong expression. Your soul is the spiritual part of you, your deepest feelings. To crush something means to destroy it with pressure. So, soul-crushing work is work that is so difficult and unpleasant that it makes you feel like your spirit is being destroyed. It's work that leaves you feeling empty and hopeless. This was how the work in the fields felt. They had nowhere to live. The farm owners did not provide housing, so, like hundreds of other migrant families, they ended up in a makeshift camp on the bank of a river. This type of camp was often called a Hooverville, Hooverville. Hooverville. This was a sarcastic name. Herbert Hoover was the President of the United States at the time, and many people blamed him for the Great Depression, the severe economic crisis that was happening. So they named these poor, sad camps after him. The Hooverville was a collection of tents and shacks made from scraps of wood, metal, and cardboard. There was no clean water. There were no toilets. It was crowded and dirty. This was the paradise they had traveled over 1,000 miles to find. Life in the camp was a daily struggle for survival. Sarah would cook their meager meals over an open fire. A meager meal is a very small one, not enough to make you feel full. They were constantly hungry, constantly tired, and constantly worried. The dream of California had turned into a nightmare. They were free, but they were trapped by poverty. They were in a beautiful land, but they were living in filth. This is a good example of irony. irony. Irony is when a situation is strange or funny because things happen in a way that seems to be the opposite of what you expected. It was ironic that they had traveled to a land of abundance, a place with so much food being grown, only to be hungrier than ever before. Despite the terrible conditions, a sense of community did form in the Hooverville, just as it had on the road. The families looked out for each other. The women would share food when they could. They would help each other watch the children. They would gather by the river to wash their clothes and share stories and worries. They found comfort in their shared experience. Leo made a few friends. They were boys his age who also worked in the fields. They didn't play much. They were usually too tired, but sometimes they would sit by the river and talk. They talked about their old homes and about their dreams for the future. They found a little bit of normalcy in their friendship, but the hardship was taking its toll, especially on the youngest and oldest. People got sick easily in the unsanitary conditions of the camp. And there were no doctors, because no one had any money. One evening, little Clara started to feel very warm. By the next morning, she had a high fever and a terrible cough. It was the same dust pneumonia that they had feared back in Oklahoma. Sarah tried everything she knew to help her. She bathed her in cool water from the river. She made her a thin soup. But Clara only got worse. She was weak and listless, and her breathing became shallow and difficult. Leo was terrified. He watched his little sister lying on their dirty mattress inside their small, dark shack, and he felt a cold dread creep into his heart. He saw the panic in his parents' eyes. This was their worst nightmare. They had come to California to save their family, and now they were watching their youngest child slip away. Thomas went to the farm boss and begged for an advance on his pay. Just a few dollars so they could try to find a doctor. But the boss just laughed at him. "If you need money, work harder," he said, and turned his back. That night was the longest night of Leo's life. Clara was burning with fever, and she was struggling to breathe. Sarah sat beside her, holding her hand, singing softly to her, tears streaming down her face. Thomas paced back and forth outside their shack like a caged animal, his face a mask of helpless fury. Leo felt a sense of rage build up inside him. It was not fair. It was not right. His sister was a good little girl. She didn't deserve this. They had worked so hard. They had followed the rules. Why were they being punished? He knew he had to do something. He couldn't just sit and watch his sister die. He thought about Al, the kind man from the garage in Arizona. He thought about the strength his mother had shown when the truck broke down. He was no longer a little boy. He was part of this family, and he had to fight for it. He slipped out of the shack. He knew that one of the other families in the camp, the Jacksons, had a car that was still working. He ran to their tent. He woke up Mr. Jackson and told him what was happening. Without a moment's hesitation, Mr. Jackson agreed to help. He said he knew of a county hospital about 30 miles away. It was for the poor. Maybe they would help them. The whole family piled into Mr. Jackson's old car. Thomas carried Clara, who was wrapped in a thin blanket. They drove through the night. When they reached the hospital, it was a small, modest building. A tired-looking nurse at the front desk told them to wait. They sat in the waiting room for what felt like years. Finally, a doctor came out. He examined Clara. He told them she was very sick with pneumonia, and she was also suffering from malnutrition. Malnutrition is a serious condition that happens when you do not get enough food, or not enough of the right kinds of food. The doctor said they would have to keep Clara in the hospital. He couldn't promise anything, but he said they would do their best. Leaving Clara at the hospital was the hardest thing they had ever done, but they knew it was her only chance. Mr. Jackson drove them back to the camp in silence. The next few days were a living hell. They worked in the fields during the day, their minds and hearts far away in that small hospital room. They didn't know if Clara was alive or dead. They could only work and wait and pray. It was during this time that Leo saw a new side of his father. The despair was gone, replaced by a quiet, fierce determination. He worked with a silent fury, picking more cotton than anyone else, driven by the need to earn every possible penny, just in case the hospital needed money. Finally, after 5 long days, Mr. Jackson agreed to drive them back to the hospital. As they walked down the clean, quiet hallway, their hearts were pounding with fear. The doctor met them. He smiled a small, tired smile. "She's a fighter, your daughter," he said. "Her fever is down. She's weak, but she's going to be okay." The relief was so immense, so overwhelming, that Sarah collapsed into Thomas's arms, sobbing with joy. Leo felt like he could finally breathe again. They went into the room and saw Clara, sleeping peacefully in a clean white bed. She was pale and thin, but she was breathing easily. She was alive. They had almost lost her, but they hadn't. In that moment, looking at his sleeping sister, Leo understood something profound. Their dream of finding wealth in California was foolish. The real treasure was not in the green fields or the promise of high wages. The real treasure was right here, in this room. It was his family. It was the love they had for each other. A love that had been tested by dust, by hunger, by prejudice, and by sickness, but had not broken. Clara's sickness was a turning point for the family. When she was finally well enough to leave the hospital, they returned to the migrant camp, but something inside them had changed. They were no longer just chasing a fantasy printed on a handbill. They were survivors. They had faced the worst, and they were still together. This new perspective gave them a new kind of strength. They continued to work in the fields, and life was still incredibly hard, but they faced it with a different attitude. They found small moments of joy where they could. They would listen to a man in the camp who played the guitar in the evenings. His sad, beautiful songs told the story of their lives, and listening to them made them feel less alone. Sarah, with her bag of seeds, found a small, forgotten patch of earth behind their shack and started a tiny garden. It was amazing to see the small green shoots push their way up through the poor soil. That little garden became a symbol of their resilience. Let's focus on that word, resilience. R-E-S-I-L-I-E-N-C-E. Resilience is the ability to become strong, healthy, or successful again after something bad happens. It is the ability to bounce back from difficulty. A plant that grows through a crack in the concrete shows resilience. A person who loses their job but then starts their own successful business shows resilience. Leo's family was learning resilience. They had been knocked down again and again, but they kept getting back up. One day, news spread through the camp that there was work in a different part of the state, picking peaches. The pay was said to be a little better. Many families were hesitant to move again. It meant leaving the little stability they had found. But Thomas and Sarah decided to take the chance. They said their goodbyes to the friends they had made, including the kind Mr. Jackson, and they packed their few belongings back into the old jalopy. They hit the road once more. This time, the journey felt different. They were not running from something anymore. They were moving towards something, a small but concrete opportunity. The peach orchards were beautiful. The work was still hard, but it was better than the cotton fields. They were paid a little more, and the farm owner provided a slightly better place for the workers to live. It was not a house, but it was a small wooden cabin with a floor and a solid roof. To them, it felt like a palace. It was here that Leo's life began to change, because the work was seasonal. There were times when there was no fruit to pick. During one of these quiet periods, a woman came to the camp. She was a teacher, and she was volunteering to set up a small school for the migrant children in a large tent. At first, many of the children, including Leo, were not interested. School seemed like something from a different lifetime, but Leo's mother, Sarah, insisted that he go. "Your father and I work with our hands," she told him, "but I want you to have a choice. I want you to work with your mind, so—" Leo went to the tent school, and he discovered that he loved it. The teacher was kind and patient. She taught them to read and write and do arithmetic. For Leo, opening a book was like opening a door out of the difficult reality of his life. He read every book the teacher had. He learned about history, about science, about faraway places. His mind, which had been so focused on daily survival, began to expand. He started to dream again, but these were different dreams. They were not dreams of getting rich. They were dreams of learning, of understanding the world. The years passed. The family continued to move, following the seasons and the harvests, from peaches to grapes to oranges. They never became wealthy. They remained poor, but they were no longer desperate. They had found a rhythm to their new life. Thomas found more stable work, eventually becoming a foreman, a leader of a small group of workers, because he was reliable and hardworking. They were able to save a little bit of money. They rented a small, proper house in a small town. For the first time in years, they had a home that wasn't a shack or a tent. Clara grew up healthy and strong. And Leo stayed in school. He was a brilliant student. He worked in the fields after school and on weekends to help the family. But his true work was in his books. He graduated from high school with top honors. The story doesn't end with them finding a pot of gold. That is not how life usually works. The real story is in the journey itself. They did not find the paradise they were looking for in California. Instead, they built a life, a real life, full of both hardship and love. They learned that home is not a place on a map. It is the people you are with. They learned that strength is not about how much you have. It is about how much you can endure. Leo, the small boy who left a dusty farm in Oklahoma, grew into a young man who understood the value of kindness, the pain of prejudice, the importance of community, and the power of resilience. He carried the lessons of the long, dusty road with him for the rest of his life. The Dust Bowl and the Great Depression were a terrible chapter in American history, but for the families who survived it, it was also a story of incredible human spirit, a testament to the simple and profound will to keep going, no matter what. As we come to the close of Leo's story, I want you to take a moment and just think. Think about the journey this family took, not just across the country, but their journey of the heart and spirit. They started as simple farmers, with a simple life. They were broken down by forces of nature and economics that were far beyond their control. They were forced onto a road filled with uncertainty and cruelty. They faced hunger, sickness, and the loss of almost everything they valued. And yet, they did not break. What was it that held them together? It was not money. It was not luck. It was their connection to each other. It was the moment Sarah found her strength, when Thomas lost his. It was the moment Leo took responsibility and walked for help. It was the way they rallied together to save Clara. It was their family bond. This story, while it is set in a specific time and place in American history, is truly a universal story. It is about the things that are important in all of our lives, no matter where we are from or what our circumstances are. We've learned some powerful English vocabulary today through this story. We've talked about words that describe places, like barren and desolate. We've explored words that describe deep feelings, like determination, desperation, and solidarity. We've learned idioms like to be in the same boat, a blessing in disguise, and to hit the road. But I hope you have learned more than just words. I hope you have felt the power of a story to teach us, to move us, and to connect us to each other. When you learn English, you are not just learning a set of rules. You are learning a new way to share your own stories and to understand the stories of others. The journey of learning a language is a lot like Leo's family's journey to California. There are times when it feels difficult, when you feel like you are stranded in the desert. There are times when you meet people who are unkind or who don't understand you. There are times when you feel like giving up. But there are also moments of unexpected kindness. There are moments when you connect with someone and you feel that sense of solidarity. And there are moments when you look back and you realize how far you have come. You need resilience. You need determination. And it helps to remember why you started the journey in the first place, to connect, to understand, and to build a better future for yourself. I want to thank you for coming on this long journey with me today. Telling stories like this is what I love most about what I do here at Best English Podcast. I believe that stories are the most powerful tool we have for learning and for understanding what it means to be human. If this story moved you, if it made you think, and if you feel that you learned something valuable today, I would like to ask you to do one small thing. Please, take a moment to subscribe or follow our podcast, wherever you're listening, and, most importantly, please be sure to turn on the notification bell. By doing that, you will be the first to know when our next story, our next lesson, our next journey together is ready for you. It helps our community grow, and it ensures that you will never miss a chance to practice your listening and continue your path to fluent English. Thank you again for your time and your attention. I'm Sophia, and I look forward to sharing another story with you very soon. Goodbye for now.